Hello, my name is Rob Edwards and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today is a very exciting week in the world of Wheel of Time because we are less than a week away from the release of the first episode of the new TV show, and I could not be more excited. I am going to attempt something that I attempt from time to time, which is to have a themed week on my channel. So I'm going to have several videos this week concerning Wheel of Time and related stuff as I get ready and excited and really keyed up for the release of the TV show. Now, in the past, I've promised a week of content with a new episode every day, but that's just not something I'm going to promise this time because I've learned my lesson. I'm not terribly good at sticking to that kind of stuff. So you'll get as many episodes this week as you get. I'm aiming for at least 3, but we'll see. My take on the actual episodes when they arrive will start next week. I'll probably watch them on Friday evening with my wife, and so I won't get a chance to talk about them properly until Monday probably. So that's just so you know my timetable. Today's episode, what I would like to talk to you about is something that I always do when new Wheel of Time content, or always used to do, I suppose, when new Wheel of Time content was imminent, which is to go back to the start and start reading the books again. Or, in fact, as became more often the case, to go back to the start and listen to the audiobooks once more. And so what I would like to do today is to do a short reviewette thing about the Eye of the World audiobook. So let's get into it. So as I say, as each new book came out back in the days before the series was finished, I would typically reread at least some of the series before I would start a new book. In the early days that meant probably all the way up until Lord of Chaos, maybe even beyond that. I would reread the entire series before starting in on the new book. This became something of a job of work. If you've seen Wheel of Time, the novels, you realise how much of an undertaking that is. And so there came a point where I decided that instead of rereading them all, for those books I was really already very familiar with, I would just sit back and enjoy a listen of the audiobook. And I have this really strong visceral I haven't got them anymore, but I'm sure I used to have a kind of Wheel of Time on cassette audiobook. And it used to be 2 tapes, and it used to be extremely abridged because you can't get the Eye of the World onto 2 audio cassettes without being extremely abridged. And a bit of research on the internet tells me that I wasn't imagining this thing existed, and that it was read by Mark Rolston, who was one of the cast members in the Aliens movie. It's been years since I've heard it. I remember enjoying it, but I do remember once the chance came to get a full unabridged version of the book, I leapt at that as well. So now I have not just Eye of the World, I have The Great Hunt, The Dragon Reborn, also New Spring, and for reasons I'm not entirely clear on, The Knife of Dreams, all in audiobook format, all by the current narrators, Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. Honestly, I don't think I've ever listened to The Knife of Dreams audiobook, certainly not all the way through. That was me trying to recap what happened just before the next book came out. I think in the end I just dived into the new book anyway. But New Spring, I have listened to a couple of times. The Eye of the World, The Great Hunt, and Dragon Reborn I've listened to several times over the years. And I have just finished a re-listen of Eye of the World now. And I'm actually I'm about halfway through, in fact, The Great Hunt. I'm also told that there is a new edition of the audiobook coming, associated with the TV show, and it's going to be narrated by Rosamund Pike, who's playing Moiraine in the show. I'm a bit of a mixed-mindedness about that, because I am a big fan, actually, of Michael Kramer and Kate Redding's readings of this show. And we'll talk about more of that in a second. Particularly because book one is so Rand-centric, it seems a bit strange to have Moiraine being the voice of it. If I'm going to review The Eye of the World in audiobook format, I think I'm going to split this up into two sections. A very quick look at The Eye of the World as a book, and then my thoughts on the audio version of it. So what do I think of The Eye of the World as a book? Now, clearly I enjoy The Wheel of Time. Clearly I enjoyed the first book enough to continue on with the series. But there are some criticisms that you can lay at the feet of Eye of the World and Wheel of Time generally, which are just as true in the first book as they are in the rest of it. But one thing which is particularly Eye of the World centric as far as criticisms go is this idea that it's a rip-off of The Lord of the Rings. And as I understand it, the perceived wisdom is this was a deliberate choice by Jordan, that a lot of the stuff which happens certainly in the early section of Eye of the World, is a direct homage to particularly Fellowship of the Ring. We have, and again I'm not going to get into plot spoilers here, but we have a cast of characters who are based in the sort of remote farming community. A mysterious stranger comes to town and recruits them onto some wild adventure, and it turns out that one of the people in the group may be a chosen one selected to defeat the big evil. And that description fits both books. It fits Fellowship and it fits Eye of the World, and there are even a lot of parallels in names and places and ideas and events. And for the first third of the book, I think that's probably a fair criticism. But the book diverges quite dramatically. The further you get into the book, the more the differences become notable. As the cast travels onto Whitebridge and Camelin and beyond, we see a lot more differences between Tolkien and Jordan. There are no elves or dwarves. There are Ogiers. Ogiers are sort of like a cross between Ents and dwarves, I suppose. But the parallel's not terribly great. I don't think it's fair to suggest that Ogiers are just tall dwarves. That would be wrong. The other criticism which gets levelled at Jordan's writing typically is quite how wordy some of the descriptive text is. And I'll be honest, I relate to this. I actually am not a big fan of huge blocks of descriptive text, and I do spend a lot of time skimming that in Jordan's writing. There's brilliant world building in there. Don't get me wrong, I'm not completely ignoring it, and the first time I read it, I was probably paying a lot more attention. But as I've reread many, many times, I probably have missed out on some of the detailing of the lace work on this piece of clothing or that piece of clothing, or that kind of element of side of it. The women in power is a big thing in Wheel of Time. The fact that there are so many women in authority, the fact that only women can safely touch the true source, that can wield the one power, that is a really positive thing about the books. I'm not convinced that Jordan always writes the best women. There are a few cliches, a few unfortunate choices further on in the books, but actually mostly for Eye of the World, I think that's in abeyance, really. I don't think we see a lot of that in this first book. I like a lot of the characters in Eye of the World, and we really get to focus on the more fun characters in there. We get a lot of Rand, we get a lot of Perrin, we get, not so much Matt, actually. Egwene, Nynaeve, we see all these people, we see their points of view. So I think these criticisms, they are valid, but they don't bother me. The descriptive text, I've dealt with it. I have my Robert Jordan reading spectacles. Basically, I know what I need to ignore, what I can skim through, what I need to pay attention to. I think that the parallels to the Lord of the Rings, while fair at the early days, is not true by the time you get to the end of book 1, and the rest of the series finds its own feet and does its own thing in completely new and exciting ways. So, the only criticism I think that I have of Eye of the World, in terms of something it doesn't do well, that I'm not going to explain away, is I think the ending of Eye of the World. It took me probably 3 readings of the book to kind of get the ending. Which is to say, I'm not saying I didn't understand at all what was going on. I felt that, I kind of meant that A goes to B goes to C, and that was all. But actually, in terms of what it means, the implications for it, and how it sets up what comes later, it was not as well handled as I would like. It's a bit rushed, it's a bit confused. There are a few, I'm not going to give a number, but there are a few important characters who are introduced and disposed of in very short order. Some of them make a reappearance later on, not all of them. And I felt the whole thing was a bit unsatisfying, a bit rushed, a bit confusing. It didn't stick the landing. Now, in many ways, that's because the whole Wheel of Time pretty much does stick the landing, I think, as long as you like what they did with it. Then, I can kind of forgive a little bit. I will not really working on it, because it is, the first chapter of a much bigger story. But I still feel that is the weakest point of Eye of the World. The weakest point of Eye of the World for me is its ending. But the start of the Great Hunt is glorious. So, what can you do, really? It's very easy, I think, when reviewing things, to concentrate on the bad stuff, which I acknowledge is what I've just done again. But let me just say, the cast in Robert Jordan's book are all really likeable. Those you're supposed to like anyway. The world building is fascinating. The fact that each character is distinct from each other, everyone has their own sort of tics and foibles and quirks, which really helps you identify, really builds those characters in your mind. And there are some really interesting arcs on show here. Some of them not paid off until several books later, but certainly the essence of it is that we've got a good, strong character arc, we've got excellent world building, and we have genuine threat to our characters, which is always felt ever present, and just fun to see how they deal with it. I really like the Eye of the World. It is not the best of the Wheel of Time. I actually think possibly books 2, 3, and 4 are the highlights for Wheel of Time. But book 1 is a good, solid base. But I said I was talking about the audiobooks today, so we should probably get on and talk specifically about my experience of the audiobooks. And the first thing I've got to say isn't a criticism. It's not a positive, actually, either. It's just a sort of my experience of it. And that is, I came to these books having read them several times before I even ventured into the audiobook world. And a lot of the characters, in my mind, I knew them. I knew the way they spoke, I knew the way they thought, I knew the way they acted. And to have them suddenly all have American accents was a bit weird. Now, of course, American writer, American narrators, why wouldn't they have American accents? That's my problem, not the books or the audiobooks problems. But it really did freak me out. It took me a while. And I find this is true for a lot of audiobooks, that I experienced the written word before the audiobook. I found it a bit also with the Amber books by Roger Zelazny. I picked up the audiobooks of those because I enjoy the books so much. And again, it took me a little bit of time to get used to the Americanness of the narrator there. One of the downsides of the audiobook, of course, is that it's very difficult to skim those long descriptive texts that we've talked about before. Very difficult on the Mark Ralston cassette tape version to skip through. But it's still quite tricky in the I've got it on iTunes, so the digital version is quite difficult to skip through as well. The other thing to say is that although it is billed accurately as Michael Kramer and Kate Redding that read the first book, they apportion the duties by chapter. So if it's a male character's point of view chapter, we get Michael Kramer. If it is a female character's point of view chapter, we get Kate Redding. And what it does mean is because a lot of the chapters, a lot of what we get here in Eye of the World is from Rand's point of view. Not all of it, but most of it is from Rand's point of view. It is Michael Kramer that does most of the heavy lifting of this story. And it does mean that he has to find a way to make so many characters distinct and different from each other, which he does fabulously. A lot of the characters, I said they originally had English voices in my head, but a lot of the characters now do have very distinct American voices because of Michael Kramer's reading of them. I actually think, although I find Kate Redding's voice easier to listen to, she actually, I think, does less of this. I think the less of her characters are distinct in the way they speak. But Kramer's voices are brilliant. And I just thought I'd round up my my review of the audiobook with my top 3 Michael Kramer voices from Eye of the World. And they are, without doubt, Bale Doman, whose Tarrabona accent is brilliant, Loyal, who has this slow, ponderous, deep voice, which Kramer does very well, I really enjoy. But my favourite of the voices in The Eye of the World has got to be Padan Fain. Now, I cannot imagine that this is the way they're going to go in the TV show. But Fain has such a whiny, wheedly, kind of oily voice. When Kramer portrays him in the books, it is absolutely fantastic. And it is by far my favourite element of his reading of these books. So there you go. My thoughts on The Eye of the World, and specifically the current, at least, audiobook version of it. Later in the week, I've got at least 2 more ideas. Am I going to share them now? One of them is going to be a look at my favourite characters, specifically from Eye of the World. And one of them is going to have a look at swearing in Randland, which I'm particularly looking forward to recording. These are probably going to be quite short videos, unlike this one, which is more of my normal epic length ones. So those hopefully coming up later in the week. For now, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Cheers.